right. Ready?
Yeah, let's do it. And compose.
And we're in. Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today, Rob and I will be discussing why we wear our wearables. Tongue twister there. And the business case for and against them, and our top tips on how to get the most value out of them without experiencing the potential downsides I think a lot of people go through. Before we get into it, a big thank you to our sponsor, Wit Fitness, the home of the training obsessed and the one-stop shop for the latest and greatest in fitness apparel, accessories, and footwear. Check out the store at Wit House London in 1 New Change St Paul's, or the website at wit-fitness.com, and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase.
I do apologise for laughing. It's just we're now reading off a script because we kept doing ourselves disjustice. So we wanted to try and really get across the message. So we do apologise for that laughing. So Ash, let's get into it. Why do we wear our wearables? First of all, what do you wear? What do you wear?
I wear, if you can see on YouTube, I'm dual wielding a Woop and a Garmin. Nice. And I will wear a chest strap for a heart rate monitor when I'm doing the rare occasions I'm doing cardio. You all right?
Yeah. Just thinking fully strapped up, just like everywhere.
Yeah. That's it. Like if I go out for a run, there's three things on me.
Has everything got a charge? Has it got to go?
Exactly. Yeah, you got to manage your batteries. It's a very important part of wearables. And for me, I'll go through them one at a time. I got my Woop first. A couple of my clients and friends recommended it to me. They got them in the US, so they before they even came out over here, and they're saying like everyone's talking about it. What's the buzz? And I had been interested in heart rate variability for quite a long time already, as a metric for stress and recovery. And the appeal to me was that it was sort of agnostic of where that stress came from, whether it's training stress or life stress or any other stress, lack of sleep stress, and you just sort of get a number which is a data point to represent that overall stress load on your body. And I'd heard the applications in elite sport, whether they're mixed martial artists or competitors in anything else, very taxing and demanding, and they would make decisions on how intense their sessions would be that day based on their heart rate variability. So they wouldn't dig too deep if they're already pretty buried under stress from whatever area of their life. So when I heard that there was a sort of consumer easy option for measuring your heart rate variability, I was very interested. So I got one as soon as I could, and I've had one ever since. So it's coming up to 3 or 4 years. I think I got it in 2017.
Was you on the one-off payment plan, or because there used to be one, didn't there?
Sorry?
There used to be a one-off payment, didn't there? That you pay and that was it. And you had.
I
don't know what when it first come out. I didn't know or has it always been a subscription based?
It was always a subscription since when I got it, I think. And yeah, it's been great. I wanted to get rid of it at one point because I got the Garmin and I thought that it would sub in for it, but it just didn't, unfortunately, which is why I now am dual wielding. The benefits that I really like from the Woop are the sleep tracking. So you get really accurate estimates of your sleep duration. I'm still amazed at how closely it is able to distinguish when I actually fall asleep and when I actually wake up from when I'm just in bed. It obviously is just that sensitive that it knows the difference of like reading in bed or when you wake up and are just like lazing in bed. It can tell exactly when you're actually awake and asleep. And I think that it's actually pretty accurate in terms of measuring the stage of sleep that you're in. The times when I've woken up in the middle of a dream, I'm always in REM on Woop when I wake up. So that to me is, it's obviously doing something right if it's able to match so closely to my experience. The sleep quality I find really interesting. It holds me accountable, so I know that I can see the cost of late nights or the late coffees in the afternoon or alcohol on my sleep. So it just helps me make healthier decisions from that respect. And also I like the phrasing that they use for low recovery is permission to rest. And I think for people who are quite competitive or push relatively hard, I'm not putting myself in that category, by the way, they might benefit from realizing that it's actually the most competitive, or the fastest way to get results is actually to back off sometimes. And having a really low recovery score because you're stressed in whatever areas of life, you can then say the smart thing to do and the way I'm winning is by not digging a deeper hole. Whereas previously, if you didn't have that data point, you might just push on and get sick and have to take more time off. So yeah, I've got a lot out of the Woop, and maybe I'll let you speak for a bit because I feel like I've been rambling for a while. What have you got at the moment, Rob?
Well, as you said, the same. I've recently come back then to Woop myself. So I have a Garmin and a Woop, and I wear a chest heart rate belt as well when I'm training. So, but a lot of that is where I've got a lot more into the endurance world. The heart rate, like utilizing heart rate and recovering and stuff like that, is really important to me and my training. So I found it really beneficial. Whereas before, where I might be, say, strength training and stuff like that, I didn't really ever wear a heart rate belt because it just didn't need to. I might track the odd session on, say, the Garmin or the Apple Watch at the time for maybe calories burned, but that was about it. But it's my main reason for then coming back to Woop because since I've been on and off it, I've tried quite a few of the wearables. I had the Aura Ring, which was great for sleep. Absolutely loved it. It just wasn't that practical day to day when you were lifting. So I found like having it on, I don't like lifting in rings, for instance, because especially grabbing a barbell, or always felt them. So the Woop was always a nice way to have something as just on the wrist out of the way. But when I originally got it, we just had Chloe, so it was about 2.5 years ago. My sleep was all over the place, and I didn't need a bit of kit telling me your sleep shit and then telling me to not train, because I was then training anyway. So it's like it was an utterly pointless procedure, because I had a bit of kit that was saying to me, right, your sleep shit, you probably should ease off. And I'm saying, no, do you know what? I know better. I'm going to train anyway. Burn out and be like, and it was just a cycle. So it was my own fault for not utilizing the data, and I get that. But Chloe sleeps better now and stuff like that. I have a more consistent. I have control to some degree. So now the data that I can kind of extract from it, I can actually influence in some way that you can when you have a kid. Obviously, when you have a kid, there is plenty of variables, but I can try and manage a lot more now. So for me, I love having a number that's like, and also I love data. I love being able to see all the things kind of put into like one application and giving you one score is great. But for me, the best bit of kit that I've really, even though I've come back to that, is my Garmin, because especially with the types of training that I do, being able to use it for running, cycling, being able to have it as my alarm in the morning so that it vibrates on my wrist rather than waking up Hannah and Chloe. So it's a much nicer way to wake up through a vibrating wrist and a noise and jolting you out of sleep. So, and also it's really good at telling me my training stress score as well. So like how much I'm pushing myself, and like, so basically like the accumulated volume over a period of time. It gives it in a really nice graph and shows it when it comes up, and when I'm pushing too much, I'm overreaching essentially, which I know Woop essentially does as well. So, but it does it in a slightly different way. So for me, I think the benefits of a Woop are only beneficial if you utilize them. So unless it's because as I said there, I love data. I love knowing numbers, but it's absolutely pointless if you do absolutely nothing with it or you're inconsistent with them.
Yeah, spot on. I think that's what I was thinking as you're saying about the early days when you got your Woop and you just had Chloe. You were being told something you already knew, and it was something that you weren't willing to do anything about. So it's actually a net, it has no impact on your life. So you're spending money on something that's not giving you anything in return. And I think for me, the key points for having a wearable is that it needs to be useful and insightful data, which you can then make a meaningful change off the back of. So if you know that when you do certain things like drinking alcohol, your sleep quality is worse, you can then make a slightly different decision of like, okay, in this situation, I actually want a really good night's sleep, so I'm not going to have alcohol on that night. Whereas on a bank holiday weekend, I've got longer to recover and I don't need to be productive, then it's fine. Those sorts of differences in action make having the data useful. But if you're going to do everything the same anyway, you're just more aware of something that's not going to change, and we're already overloaded with inputs these days anyway. There's so much information coming at us that another piece of information that we're not going to do anything with is just occupying brain space, which could be better spent elsewhere.
Exactly. And I guess everyone has their own reasons for having a wearable, if they have one, or heart rate belt, and well, there's a wearable, and why they wear them. So I know obviously people, Apple Watches and whatnot, so like Fitbits, like tracking your steps, tracking your sleep, tracking the calories that you burn. As you put, I love it as a status as an exerciser. I thought it's a fashion piece, things for Insta, people putting up on their stories, this is my scores. And it's like, that's completely fine if you have it. But I guess when it comes to like tracking steps and like calories that you burn, it's like, what's the point in knowing if you've done 10,000 steps? If you're looking at your thing and you've done 4,000 steps and you do nothing with that, it's like, okay, cool. I need to go out for a walk now and make it to 10,000 because I want to be someone that walks to 10,000 steps a day. So I want to have a daily NEAT of whatever to make sure that's my minimum that I do. And sometimes it's going to happen at 8 o'clock at night. And if you choose not to go out, then okay, fine. Maybe you have to do a bit more the next day, or you go out. Exactly. So, but it's making sure that if you see you've only done 4,000 steps, as an example, then do more either the next day or get out for that walk. The one thing that I'm not a biggest fan of is the ones, I guess, it's a Fitbit that obviously just telling you the amount of time you sleep, but that's it.
So I think they've upgraded since the early days of that. Yeah, so they do give you a measure of the quality as well. Oh, no. And I might be out of touch with the latest updates, but the last time I checked, they didn't have a journal function, which is what I think is one of the real points of benefit of Woop, is that it has a journal function on the app where every day when you review your sleep, you can put in a diary of what you did the previous day. So did you drink alcohol? Did you have caffeine? How many servings did you have? What time of day did you have them? Were you doing intermittent fasting? Did you wear earplugs to bed? There's like a huge variety
so many now.
Of health options that you don't have to answer them all. Like you choose which questions you put in. And it just means you can correlate your data against your daily habits to evaluate whether they're actually helpful or not and how severe the impact might be. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing the Woop does, is gives you real personal evidence as to the effectiveness of these habits. And for me, probably the best example of this is blue light blocking glasses. I used to wear them for years, and we don't go into the benefits, but essentially it's supposed to improve your sleep quality by blocking blue light later into the evening. And I'd worn them for a really long time, had loads of data wearing them and not wearing them, and I'd stick it into Woop. And basically consistently over a long period of time, there was no significant difference to my sleep when I wore them, when I didn't wear them. So I just stopped wearing them. And the things that do make a difference, you're aware of. The things that don't make a difference, you're aware of. And you can then respond, which is the crucial thing, because we're all trying to upgrade whatever we're tracking. That is why we're tracking it. We're trying to improve our sleep. We're trying to improve our fitness. And that's the whole point behind these wearables. But if you're just getting data, and I might be wrong on this, but let's say Fitbit doesn't let you correlate the behaviors with the data output, then you can't knowingly make as well-informed decisions. So I would see that some days my sleep was better, some days my sleep was worse. And unless I'm manually creating a journal or diary, noting days when I've worn blue light blocking glasses, I can't make an informed decision as to whether that's actually beneficial or not. Whereas Woop just makes it so much easier to see these habits make a difference in this way, those habits make a difference in the other. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, it seems like a massive sale pitch of Woop, doesn't it?
I know. Get my discount code in the show notes so everyone can give me a free month for the referral.
That's a good point, actually. No, but on yeah, you can choose to pick. But I think a big thing with that is the diary feature, because it's just like a yes and no, or like the time. Like for me, the caffeine consumption one is key, because I'm someone that feels that I can have a coffee at 8 p.m. and sleep completely fine. But I haven't got any data that I can remember looking at right now, as in like looking at, cool, when I have drank that, what has been my sleep? Look, what does that look like? And I obviously go off the general thing. I try not to have coffee past 1 p.m. But what does that look like for me in sleep? So it is something that I actively want to look at and actually start to see, because I have these perceptions of myself and I think that this is how I feel, but maybe it might not affect my sleep that night. But maybe it's a rolling thing that then maybe it starts to affect long term, a couple of nights down the line and so forth. And I guess that all boils down to like, what are you measuring and why? And what are you going to do with this data? And that's essentially, you know, with these bits of data using the journal, is that one of the amazing things with Woop is when they give you like their monthly review and say, right, this is what you've done. And as you say, all those correlations, it kind of gives you that review for. And it's the same as like when you're like wearing a heart rate belt and stuff. It's like being able to kind of see like maybe average heart rates of sessions that you do and stuff like that. You can start to create a better picture. So let's kind of move away from Woop, so we're not selling it so much, and maybe let's talk about heart rate in training and using it as a metric for maybe it's like monostructural cardio. So whether that's in CrossFit, like maybe assault bike, rowing or whatever, maybe that's cycling, running, something like that. Maybe some sports like five-a-side football, since obviously you've got some good data with that, and maybe something like CrossFit. So using it as a metric within there, where is it beneficial for all of them? Or is there kind of a pointless place to have it, would you say?
For those three, monostructural, CrossFit and sport, I would say it is useful in all three of those, as long as you're interpreting the data correctly or intelligently. It's one thing that is, I'm jumping ahead into our show notes now, but it is not the whole story. So when you get these data points, there is more going on than just these data points. So it's important to view them with the relevant context around them. But from a monostructural point of view, it's been a big part of all endurance sport for quite a long time, and for very good reason. And if you were to distill it down, we obviously did a deep dive on this with Luke a couple of episodes ago when we did our VO2 max review. If we're looking at polarized training, heart rate is a metric we can monitor to make sure that the easy stuff is easy enough and the hard stuff is hard enough. So avoiding that no man's land in the middle, sort of zone 3, that's not giving a strong stimulus in either direction. Having the number to rely on rather than just going by feel. Like, I think RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, is sometimes useful in cardio and has its place. But if we've got data, then it removes some guesswork. So it's really, How have you found that in your cycling?
Yeah, it's been really good, because it's like I work off power. So because for me, that's a lot more of an accurate description of what I'm doing, essentially an accurate feeling, rather than heart rate. Because like, for instance, yesterday was an example. So after our VO2 thing, how has your stuff been going since? Have you been taking your beta alanine? Have you doing your sprints?
No, I have been taking my beta alanine, but not doing my sprints. So bit of a spoiler alert. I'm going to do an experiment taking a month of beta alanine without changing my training to see the effect of beta alanine on its own. So I've got to try and have as identical a training month as I had in the month preceding, which is basically not very much training. So it'll be quite easy.
And get your 4% the day before.
Yeah, it's actually just getting the face tingles. Nice. And see how my VO2 max changes.
Okay. Interesting.
Just from the supplement.
So yesterday I did my first basically zone 2 session, right? And so it was 2 hours on the bike, and it was very thing, but it was a long time sitting on the bike, very uncomfortable actually, just sitting on the trainer. And heart rate was average, I think 129. So I did perfectly. Kept it in zone 2. I was well happy. However, it felt really hard. And I really struggled, because so it's like because I might have gone from like a high cadence to low cadence. I had some bits where it's just sustained. And even though the power wasn't that high, it was these efforts of sustained, and like it was surprisingly hard. And the thing, if I was basing it off perceived exertion, don't get me wrong, I wasn't gassed, but I was just like, I found it harder than my heart rate told me it was. So the fact that, you know, say an average of, for instance, 130, so say average 130, like that is zone 2 work for me. And that's exactly where I needed to be. So I was really happy with that. And I'm keeping that in once a week for sure. But it just made me really understand the value of the heart rate belt there, and obviously having my power zones together, because having those two metrics, so having the numbers available, meant that I was working as hard as I needed to, not how I felt and how I think I should be working. Because then I would have worked a lot less, which then would have probably been counterproductive, because then I wasn't working hard enough, because I wasn't in that sweet spot. So it's just making sure, giving me that optimal zone.
Brilliant.
So what about with the 5-a-side? Because I guess having heart rate as a metric for 5-a-side football, is it a good thing? Is it a necessity? Because you don't exactly look at your heart rate during it, do you?
No, not at all. So it's definitely not a necessity. I do it out of interest more than anything else. And it is just interesting to see how I pace myself during the game. And you can see, like, if we had a close draw which went down to the last minute a couple of weeks ago, and for the last 5 minutes I was basically near max throughout, because I was just doing everything I could to see out the result. And it's interesting for me in sport how much harder I can work and for how much longer, because my mind is elsewhere compared to just doing that boring card. If I was on a bike, I would not be able to hold the high heart rates that I held during the football match for the same amount of time, because all you're thinking about is the sensations that are going on in your body and the numbers on the screen, and it's pretty miserable. But when you're chasing a ball around a pitch and having fun, I guess you're able to push yourself that little bit harder. And I think, well, to go back to one of our old podcasts about training versus competing, that's not to say that football is necessarily a better stimulus for improving your fitness. It might be, compared to some bullshit training that you're doing that's not very effective. But having the data is just interesting to compare and contrast and see how it felt compared to how you performed, compared to what your heart rate was doing during the match. But yeah, absolutely not a necessity for the rank amateur like myself.
Yeah, and I guess so it'd be similar to CrossFit really, because again, within CrossFit, it's a little bit different, because obviously you do have massive peaks and then you have down periods as well, especially you say within a class format or something like that. So having the data there maybe during might seem a bit pointless. Maybe when you're say doing Fran, that if you're especially if you're in a class and you had Fran programmed, like knowing that you're at 90% heart rate or at 70% heart rate, doesn't matter. You can either do it or you can't. So I guess it doesn't really, it's not a great metric, but maybe afterwards having that data for when you repeat it, and maybe you're a bit more technically proficient and stuff like that. So you have this data to work with. So it's as long as you have somewhere to store this data and then refer back to, just like with progressive overload, just like with all of this stuff, with tracking your macros, tracking your weight, all of this stuff is, you need to understand where you've been to know where you're going to. So it's having those points and say, cool, okay, this is what I need to do to get better. Yeah, I think Fran's a really good example. Well, the first thing to say about Fran is, if you're looking at anything but the bar or the barbell, you're probably doing it wrong and need to scale it. But the data you might see from Fran is heart rate just shooting up to near max and staying there throughout, and that's probably what you should be seeing. But other things you might see is that in one of the two movements, you actually see a drop in heart rate, and you might be failing reps depending on what level of scaling you've chosen. And this is a great application of the data for CrossFit to show what your limiter is. So if you're doing something monostructural, typically people are quite capable in those movement patterns, whether it's running, cycling, any other cardio machines, and are able to push themselves quite hard
in that modality. But when you start mixing the movements up, you can be limited by local muscular fatigue, by skill. So if you're doing something like Amanda, your heart rate's probably not going to get super high unless so Amanda is snatch and muscle ups, unless the snatch is super light for you and you're very, very good at muscle ups. But even so, just because of the nature of the movements are comparatively slow compared to thrusters and pull-ups, you're unlikely to be able to get your heart rate quite as high. So as a coach, or if you're looking at your own training to evaluate how it's going, you can see that you might not be getting the stimulus that you thought you were getting. Like if your heart rate's never getting over 80% in Fran, then maybe you're not ready for that version of Fran just yet. And if you want to get that high threshold stimulus, using different movements or different rep ranges is something you could tweak to get more out of that session for that person. And it's more of a qualitative review rather than a quantitative review, which is nice.
And I think the big thing about having heart rate monitors, wearing any of these wearables, is making sure you action on the data. And otherwise, as this has been a running theme of this whole episode, and the main reason is because I've been the other side of it, is in I just don't action on the data a lot of the time. So even though I'm such a fan of data, I love seeing numbers, that I like to know how hard I'm working and everything from lifting, cycling to, tracking effort in general. But unless you do something with it, it's completely pointless. But also you need to understand that it's a very individual thing, because comparing your average power in a race or your heart rate variability to someone else's is utterly pointless, but can so easily be done. We mentioned earlier about Instagram and stuff like that, people posting their like scores and stuff like that. And when you see someone's heart rate variability, say like 150 and yours is 75, you're like, fuck, I must be really unfit compared to that person. But there's so many other factors that just haven't come into it. But by having these personal metrics help guide your training and your efforts to make sure you're progressing on your journey. And that's the thing. And then if you beat people along the way, then that's amazing. But, I really love this saying of don't be put off by comparing someone else's chapter 13 to your chapter 3. Or as there might be chapter 1, chapter 10, whatever. It doesn't matter what chapter you're on. Basically, the point is they're further ahead than you, so don't compare. And then, as I think the classic saying of comparison is the thief of joy by Teddy Roosevelt. So it's like, focus on your individual numbers, whether that's from a heart rate, whether that's from power, whatever. That's why I love cycling, because with cycling, it's watts per kilo. So even though I might put out 400 watts, and then someone else puts out, say, 350. If they weigh 20 kilos less than me, their watts per kilo is going to be a lot higher. I'm only at 4 watts per kilo. They're at like 5.6, say, as an example. So technically, they have a lower watts, but higher watts per kilo. So they're a lot more powerful. So, it's a very clear cut. Whereas, like, you mentioned it off air with, say, like powerlifting, a lot of it is the total number lifted. Yes, you're in weight classes a lot of the time, but still, you're still with a bunch of people that might be a bit heavier than you, a bit lighter than you, but you're within the bracket. So it's like, technically, it's like, yes, you've lifted more than that person, but your kilos per kilo. Yeah, that is. Right. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, kilos per kilo isn't a thing. That's why when you see people put up on Insta, oh, this is my 4 times body weight deadlift. It's like, it's still only like 140. So it's like, piss off. That is not the same as lifting. Like, it's just not the same. I don't care. And but it's because I've had such an emotional attachment to my numbers. It's sometimes hard to take a step back and look at the big picture and look at the trends and focus more. I'm just looking at, oh shit, today I'm 6% and I'm supposed to not train. Fuck it, I'm going to train, and it's all pointless. And you just it's this spiral, and that's the thing, is having that being able to step back and look at the big picture. So,
I think that is a big one, actually. So it's being able to take a step back, review things objectively, and not get overly emotional about what you're seeing. It's just an input. It's not the whole story. It is something to bear in mind, but not an absolute truth that is dogma. You can't train with 10% recovery. You can train. It just might not be the best idea for you on that day. But if it's the morning of a competition, you haven't got a choice. You're gonna have to go. So I don't think it's worth putting too much weight into. But if you spot a trend over time that every point of this cycle you're always super low recovered and then you have a bad performance afterwards, then you can start paying attention to it. But I think getting overly upset or excited about one score on one day is probably a bit too reading too much into it.
Yeah. So kind of like the takeaway that we want you to kind of pull away from this episode is, in a way, this is like progressive overload, like with lifting, is in we look at where we started and we look at how to get stronger over time. If we have days where we don't lift as much, it's not the end of the world. But we know we're working on a trend that's going generally upwards towards something. So we're having data to compare back to go forward with. And that's the same with all this stuff. So having heart rate belts, having any wearables, Garmin's, Whoops, whatever, like you've got information that you can do something with if you choose to do something with it. And if you've got the exposable income to just, wear these things and not do anything with it, then that's fine. If you just want that, that's completely fine. But just remember, it's utterly pointless. So, and I think really, I love the saying of like, see it as an input rather than the whole story. I think that's a key one that I've taken away, and that feelings are a shitty indicator of truth. I think you said that before, and that's a really good one. It's like, for instance, this morning when I woke up, I had a really good night's sleep, and I felt like I had a good night's sleep. Woke up at 5:15, and I just felt tired. I just did not want to get out of bed. It took me about 5 minutes to roll out of bed, just like lying there. Had a shower. 5 minutes into my first kind, I felt absolutely amazing. It might have been the coffee hitting, but I did have 4 cups today. But it's only because so 30 grams with like
it's
600.
Lunchtime.
So I had that, and so that's probably part of it. But I felt amazing. And I think it was like, in Andre's episode 58, if you listen back to that, really good episode, where he spoke about warming up, and then through the warm-up, it's then when you start to decide. And it's true. It's like, you can't just wake up and say, oh, that's me. I am 6% today. And that's what I used to do. I used to look at Woop straight away and be like, oh, fuck, it says I'm feeling bad. And then that would influence feelings because I had that emotional attachment to it. So I'm just an emotional being, mate. So
more cyborg, mate.
So, but yeah, I think as we said, just be clear, and if you can, why not? I think that's the thing. If you can, why not? It's better to have something than not. So, but as always, guys, thank you very much for listening. We do really appreciate this, and we appreciate your support. Thanks for your time. Please share with someone you think may have enjoyed this and get something out of it, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And if you are feeling generous, a cheeky Apple rating and review will make our day. And if you have any questions or want to be featured on the podcast, slide into our DMs on Insta or email us at contact@lungeandlift.com. Just check out the description box below. And again, thanks again. Thank you, Ash, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.